Day 2 Euro. 6:07 p.m. Euro. City Mall Bacoor, basement parking, central area. The party was still not over for the survivors and the soldiers when First Lieutenant Raphael came down to the parking and started ordering the soldiers. The soldiers immediately left the group and went back to their posts while some had gone running up the stairwell on the east wing. Apparently, the rescue squads dispatched was arriving in ETA 30 minutes. The military planned to imitate what Mark and his group did last night to lure away the infected from the entrance of the basement parking. The only difference was they also planned on thinning the numbers by throwing explosives onto the lured infected. It was reasonable as it would be harder to leave the mall afterwards if the number of infected was not lessened even a little. The announced arrival of the rescue squads lifted the spirits of the survivors even more. They could finally go and leave this place into a several times safer environment. As the rescue was arriving, Mark also started to move. He told Odalina to let her children wait inside the vehicle together with Abigail as they went back to the tech zone to gather their things and other stuff. Abigail actually wanted to follow, but her papa gave her the important duty of guarding Odalina's children. Though she looked sullen, she did not want to disobey her papa and patiently sat on the vehicle. Since she obediently followed his instructions, Mark promised to find her some sweets and toys when they return. Back in the tech zone, Mark tidied up the network of laptops he set up yesterday. Still, he only planned on bringing 3 laptops with him. One was a small compact netbook that he could use for miscellaneous things, a larger one which he could use to play games whenever he wanted to, and another one for reserve in case that the other laptop broke and he could not find any replacement. All of the 3 units he decided to bring was the most expensive and had the highest specs in the whole tech zone. When he checked the laptops, he was quite disappointed. Not all the games he downloaded were finished in time. The internet was already down several hours before. Fortunately, the games that were not finished downloading could be found in game stores in some malls, and he would be able to acquire a copy if he just gave it some effort. Mark also did not forget to bring some gadgets that would be useful for them, especially the USB gadgets they used before. He also brought several expensive cell phone units, 2-way radios and solar chargers. While Mark was scouring through the tech zone stores, May and Odalina were in charge of gathering clothes and other essentials like soap and medicine. Their group went back and forth to the vehicle using the cargo elevator and loaded the things into the back of the vehicle. As for the food, they just drove the vehicle to the entrance of the warehouse and get the supplies from there. Inside the warehouse, they happened to come across a large box about the size of a computer CPU in the electronics storage area. On the surface large box, there was a picture of a secure-shaped quadcopter. It was actually a camera-mounted remote-controlled drone. Of course, Mark decided to grab it. It was a must. Then, Mark thought of it. When they went to the toys area to get some toys he promised Abigail, they also grabbed some remote-controlled cars and flying toys they could get. There are a lot of possible ways to use these toys in the apocalypse other than just for fun. The car was filled with supplies even under the seats and the compartments. Estimating the amount of food they carried, it would last them at least 2 weeks if eaten moderately. The rescue squads had long arrived before they could even finish their preparations. At the central area of the basement parking, several large trucks were parked along with more than a dozen military vehicles. Now, it was time for Mark to get the last thing to bring. It was the docile infected he kept in the storage in the tech zone. Mark went to get a pet collar, chains and a biker face mask. When Mark returned in the room, the biter was already awake, but like before, she just looked at them without any notion to attack. Mark put the mask to cover her mouth and tied the collar on her neck connected to the chains. They also replaced the wires that tied her arms with a tie-down strap and fully removed the wires on her legs. Mark also asked to change the clothes and clean the biter's body as to not dirty the insides of the vehicle. When Mark tugged the chains, the biter quietly followed, making the process much easier. When Mark brought out the biter, he heard a familiar voice shouting in surprise. "Jeanette!" It was Julie, one of the 2 college students Mark helped with Paula when they went to find medicine for Saria. Briandon was also surprised, but it seemed that he managed to control himself. "What are you doing to her?" Julie shouted, getting the attention of the people around. The employees knew who the Tide girl was and did not question Mark and his group about what they were doing with her, but the newcomers were starting a commotion. Julie tried to rush and free the biter she called Jeanette, but he was pulled back by Briandon. It looked like she had not noticed yet. "You know her?" Mark ignored the hubbub of the gallery and questioned Julie. "She's my best friend. Why did you tie her up? Release her." As the commotion grew loud, it also caught the attention of the soldiers. One of the soldiers came close and questioned Mark about the tied-up girl. "What are you doing? Do you that what you are doing against the law?" Mark looked strangely at the soldier. It seemed that this soldier just arrived along with the rescue squad. He did not think that any of the soldiers that came with Ange's brother not know him. Seeing that Mark was just staring at him like an idiot, the soldier was enraged. He was about to raise his gun at Mark when a voice interrupted him. "Jonas, stand down." There were several soldiers who just entered the tech zone, being led by 3 people. The 2 was familiar with Mark's group. They were Ange's brother and the high school boy with them this morning. Mark could not recognize the other person though. It was that person who made the angry soldier stop. Looking at his insignia, he was also a rank higher than Ange's brother. "What happened, Jonas? There was no need for you to raise your gun at people." "I'm sorry, Captain Theo. It is just this group had a girl with her mouth covered and tied up like a dog." Hearing what Jonas said, Theo looked at Mark's group and then at the tied-up girl. His eyebrows then rose. "That's a Z-type 1, is it not?" Hearing what his captain said, Jonas looked at the tied-up girl. The captain then continued. "Strange, it doesn't seem to be aggressive." Now, even Raphael, high school boy, and the other soldiers was shocked. It was a non-aggressive Z-type. On the other side, Julie was embraced by Briandon crying. She also realized her best friend was no more. The one standing in front of her right now was nothing but a husk of her past self. "You're Mark 1, presume? I'm Theodore Cruz, the officer in charge at this rescue mission. Don't tell me that it's another recruitment offer?" "No, I already heard about the details. We don't plan on forcing anyone as long as they do not become a threat to the order." "Then, what do you need from me?" "We are actually here to grant you a little reward from the general for saving his daughter and her friend. Please come with us." As Mark detected no ill intent on him, Mark nodded and they were brought back to the central area of the basement parking. Captain Theo led them to a Humvee and opened the back compartment of the vehicle. The contents inside was several assault rifles and boxes of ammunition. "Please get as much as you can. The general already heard about your plans from his daughter, and as you said to Raphael, we had manpower to spare at the moment. We could not help you search for those people, but we could at least provide you with weapons. We do not lack any of it after all." "I see. Give my thanks to the general then." Without any ceremonies, Mark and his group went to take as much as they can, stuffing their vehicle. When they left, Theo murmured, "Actually, this Humvee is theirs for the taking, but it looks like they already have a better vehicle." Raphael then asked him, "You're not asking him to hand over that Z-type? You think he will hand it over? Really, you should learn to read people, Raph. If you and my sister married, you'll be on for a beating because of that." Looking at the back of Mark's group from a distance, he continued, sternly. "Also, don't try to provoke that person. If I did not stop Jonas earlier, he would be a goner now. Who knows what he could do? I don't think he is a mutator, but probably much more dangerous than them. Anyway, we need to prepare and rest. We'll leave at sunrise." When Mark was about to retire for the night, Paula and Ange came to talk to him. "What do you two want?" "We're just here to say that we'll be keeping the favor we owe you. We had nothing to do with your disagreement with Ange's brother this morning. If there was a time in the future that we meet again, feel free to ask us what you need." Paula replied and Ange nodded to what her friend said. "You don't have to be angry with us. It's my stupid brother's fault and we had nothing to do with it. Actually, Ange was really worried for you last night that she cried. However, when you woke up, You became angry with this and she is really sad. Paula. Hearing the banter of the two, Mark sighed. All right. Keep the favors you two owe me. I don't actually have any place to bring the people I want to find, so I'll be dropping them in the Bay City in the future. I'll ask you two to take care of them then. The two girls nodded. Also here. Ange returned Mark his phone she borrowed and also handed a weird-looking phone a large antenna. Mark knew what kind of phone this was and he was surprised. A satellite phone? Yes. I got this from my brother. With this, you can contact us anytime. All right. I'll accept it. As the almost broken thread between them was mended, Mark chatted with two for a while before they went to rest. The two girls also said their goodbye to May and Abigail, who also spent some time with them since yesterday. Day 3 a euro. 5:13 a.m. a euro. City Mall Bacoor, basement parking, central area. The large convoy composed of almost 24 military vehicles and several military trucks was lined up in front of the shutters at the entrance of the basement parking. The soldiers were all ready to fire their guns and drive through the infected. The shutters finally opened and the guns started firing at the infected as they waited for the soldiers that opened the shutters to board their vehicles. At 5:18 in the morning of the third day of the outbreak, the survivors left the mall while being escorted by the military. The route they planned to take was to the west following the Tirona Highway and to enter the expressway at Kawit, which directly led towards the Bay City. This route was also the one the rescue squad took to get to this mall and made them familiar with the road. When the convoy came out, the infected was attracted to the noise their vehicles made, and the vehicles guarding the rear of the convoy continues firing at the infected chasing behind them. A few minutes after the convoy left with the horde behind them, a black refitted armored van drove out of the basement parking going to the opposite direction the convoy went. It was unknown to every one of them. A silhouette of a large humanoid was watching the vehicles as they drove away from the rooftop of the mall. It watched the black van drive away before it jumped down the building, creating a crater at the spot it fell. After that, the silhouette ran following the horde of infected to the west. As explained by Professor Isaac Company, he said that this mutagenic pathogen, aka mutagen, was highly unstable once the person was bitten and was infected by the agitator strain of the virus. Mark and his company finally went out of the mall and will surely encounter mutated Z-types. Now, what kind of Z-types are they? You guys would be able to choose what catalyst you want to use to mutate the infected. You can choose the catalyst whether it be a disease or something else. Well, of course, the catalyst should not be something like fully solid material. Maybe some of you guys try to suggest plastic bottles and stuff. Just how would that affect our pathogen? Did someone eat a whole plastic bottle before they got bitten? The heck? Post your selected catalyst in the comments and by order. First come first serve. The infected mutated using your catalyst might appear before the characters in this novel. Now, what was the fun there? You guys will be able to select the catalyst, but you would never guess how the mutagen would mutate the infected. Their abilities would also be decided by the pathogen. Who knows? The catalyst you guys chose might actually turn an infected into the strongest one. Also, how would those mutated Z-types would mess with the characters? It was something fun to see, right? Anyways, I haven't done or said this before. Buddha Euro. Give me your precious stones. Muahahahahaha. Geez. Please pardon me for being crazy this one time. Day 3 a euro. 6:23 a.m. a euro. Urdaneta City, Pangasinan, Philippines. Urdaneta City, about 200 kilometers north of Bay City evacuation zone. It was the third day of the outbreak and this city had not been fully affected. There would be some skirmishes as the infected arrived, but was still minimal. With the remains of the military, local government and local police, they were managing to hold the infected back until now. They blocked the main highways and destroyed the bridges to at least hinder the infected as much as possible. Still, they were just barely managing. Once the full brunt of the advance of the infected finally arrived this area, their defenses would surely crumble. Some mutated infected already reached their defenses. They managed to kill the mutants, but their losses were also devastating. On the first day of the outbreak, The local authorities were warned about the passenger flights that crashed, and the closest one to this city was actually beyond the mountain regions several kilometers north of the city. Fortunately, due to the uneven mountain terrain and other factors, the infected from the crashed plane had not made it out of the forested mountains. However, while the authorities were all bent on holding back the infected, the city they were protecting was in utter chaos. Most of the population in the city was in panic. They already lost media communication since yesterday. There were no television broadcasts and no internet connection available. The only thing they knew before the connections were cut off was that the whole world was being infested by zombie-like creatures. At first, many of them dispatched the thought as a hoax or gimmick by the government as excuse to deploy martial law, but before the announcement was made, they never heard much from the Malika plus or minus Eng Palace anymore. By this time, violence, theft, looting, murder and rape was happening in the whole city, and the remaining police could not do about it. The situation was horrible and their manpower was not enough for this. They also had no reinforcements to call. They were all left to fend for themselves. Those who were smart enough went and left the city after collecting as much supplies as they could. They were betting on going to the north, the city of Pines, Baguio City. However, most of the populace remained on the city shelters or barricaded their homes, betting on waiting out the outbreak. It was not that they did not want to leave, but they had no capability of doing so. Unknown to the city, by this moment, the final defense of the local government collapsed. Day 3 Euro. 6:23 a.m. Euro. Baguio City, Benguet, Philippines. The city of Pines and was also called as the summer of the Philippines due to the high altitude of the area and its colder climate compared to other parts of the country all year long. The city was surrounded by mountain ranges and could only be accessed by the long winding roads across the mountainsides and valleys. It was an ideal place to secure, as the mountains could act as a natural barrier against the infected. However, compared to the chaos that was happening in Urdaneta several kilometers south, the whole city was calm. It was calm, but not in a good way. No people could be seen in the streets, no animals, and no military. Most people, be it civilians or the military, were holed up in shelters and the buildings around the city. No one dared to come out into the streets, turning the whole city into a ghost city. While the southern areas of Luzon, the largest archipelago, was being invaded by the infected due to the lack of geographical defenses, the natural defenses around Baguio City worked the opposite way they wanted it to be. As the mountains were highly forested, it would be a good source of food and other construction materials. Still, no one thought that these forested mountains was the cause of their fear. It was fine in the first 2 days of the outbreak, and the government actually chose Baguio City as one of the potential settlement areas for survivors and refugees. The military was deployed around the city and was busy in building walls and other defenses. However, just last night, one of the military outposts was attacked. Not by the infected and not by humans either. Coming out from the mountains, a pack of cloud rats attacked the soldiers. The pack consisted by about 50 cloud rats. It was not a problem for the soldiers to put down such rats if it was before the outbreak, but the problem they faced was cloud rats that was way larger than normal. The size varied, with the smallest was the size of a dog while the bigger ones were the size of a cow. Furthermore, their bodies were highly impervious to bullets. A 9mm pistol bullet could only do a shallow wound on their skin. Normally, these nocturnal rodents were slow and were hunted almost to extinction as food. Now, however, these rodents were the ones doing the hunting, and in a very feral manner. Due to the surprise attacks, the soldiers lost the outpost with a devastating amount of casualties. It would be good if that was the end of it, but the pack of rodents came into the city wreaking havoc and killing the residents. The pack was soon wiped out with great effort and casualties, but then, a monkey-eating eagle about the size of a car flew down into the city to grab a body of a deceased cloud rat. The scene terrified the people. It would be just the body of the large cloud rat for now, but what if it started grabbing people to feed on them? Found on the other sides of the Cordillera mountain region that was surrounding Baguio City was several ethnic tribes were living in their ancestral land. However, each tribes were now gone. What was left on their abodes were bloody mess and dead bodies of their tribesmen. It was because the tribe members failed to believe the lectures of their seer several days ago. The seer's family evacuated and left the mountain along the other older families under the mocking gazes of the tribesmen. This was just how much their culture was affected by the modern era. Now, however, they paid the price. Just this morning, their tribe was attacked by an infected. Not just a normal infected but a mutated one which came from the crashed airplane just one mountain away from their tribe. As the whole tribe was killed, a loud excruciating scream was heard in the middle of the tribe's settlement. It was the mutant spreading the vibrations of its voice across the surroundings, searching for prey, and would also disorient enemies nearby. It then looked towards the north and scurried off under the shades of the trees in the forest. *********Day 3 Euro 6:57 a.m. Euro, Mandaue City, Cebu, Philippines. The city was now a lost cause. It was one of the places where a plane crashed in the middle of the city in the country. The Muktan Cebu International Airport was just on the other island south of the city and was surely the reason why a passenger plane would came crashing in this city. The survivors of the city fled to the mountains just west of the city. Whether they would leave the mountains alive would be another thing though. ********Day 3 Euro 6:59 a.m. Euro, Zamboanga City, Zamboanga del Sur, Philippines. It was another city that was already a lost cause. However, compared to other cities, the amount of survivors that managed to flee from this city was higher compared to others. It was due to the existence of armed militant groups, also known as terrorists, in the area. The normally threat-causing groups was now fighting the infected as much as they could while they secured the survivors from the surrounding areas. A large settlement was built by these armed groups in the nearby island of Basilan, directly south of Zamboanga City. This island was said to be the main base of the terrorists in this area and was the island where most skirmishes between the military and these groups happened. With the terrorists in the lead, they commanded over the survivors into creating their own region. A government where they were the voice and the populace could do nothing against them. ******Day 3 Euro 7:05 a.m. Euro, San Andres, Catanduanes, Philippines. It was one of the largest islands in Luzon and the largest one in the Bicol region. As the island was detached from the mainland, it was one of the places where the government planned to build an evacuation zone. The town of San Andres as the port area became the central area of the evacuation zone. Right now, the entrance and exit to the island was strictly monitored by the Coast Guard and the military patrolling the areas to the west of the island facing the mainland. Here, as the area was safer, the survivors had more freedom compared to other evacuation zones. However, that changed last night as an armed group came out of the mountains and a small skirmish happened between the group and the military. It was not a secret to the soldiers and the residents of the island that there were several armed groups that was based within the mountains of the island. Right now, it seemed that the armed group wanted to wrestle over the control of the residents of the island. *******Day 3 Euro 7:16 a.m. Euro, Bacoor City, Cavite, Philippines. The outbreak had already succumbed the whole city into a dead zone. Aside from several groups who managed to secure their places and those who successfully managed to hide themselves, everywhere else was danger. The local armed forces secured schools as evacuation areas and were barely managing to defend the area of the infected. Attacks from mutated infected instilled fear to the survivors as breaches could not be helped. During these breaches, it was up to every survivor to defend themselves and remain alive. The rich had the advantage in securing places to live in. As they all lived in private subdivisions surrounded by tall concrete walls and sturdy metal gates, it was harder for most infected and even mutants to breach their defenses. The only downsides to these groups were that their manpower was too lacking. It was barely enough to keep the infected at bay outside the gates and walls. ******** On the other part of the country, of all the evacuation zones the government planned to build, less than half was cut off in the early stages. By now, the current population of living people in the Philippines was reduced by 75%. Day 3 Euro 6:11 a.m. Euro, New York City, New York, USA. This city was the most populous city in America, having half of the population of the state itself. However, this was also the reason why the number of infected in this area was much larger than other places nearby. The military and armed forces failed all possible containment and quarantine of the infected. It would have been possible for the authorities to secure the Manhattan area as it was a large detached land. To enter and leave the area, one has to travel through bridges which were connected to the other areas of the state. If the military was able to successfully destroy the bridges, it might have been turned to the most populated places in the world that would have been free of the infected for some time. Unfortunately, to the fact that New York had a very large population, the armed forces failed their duty to secure the area, and they failed ultimately. The armed forces were overwhelmed not by the infected but the panicking people in the initial phases of the outbreak. However, they had their backup plans. On this third day of the outbreak, the armed forces had already established 3 secure areas in the middle of the state. These were the Rikers Island, the Randalls and Wards Island, and the Roosevelt Island. The 3 evacuation zones were islands in the middle of the state in the middle of the East River, and all were accessible through bridges that were built across the islands, with Rikers Island as the exception. At first, the local government was apprehensive against using the Rikers Island as an evacuation zone, as it was the home of one of the world's largest correctional and mental facilities, but unfortunately, they had no time to be picky. They just decided to use the prisoners as cannon fodder to successfully secure the islands. It was an extreme method but was successful, and it would also lessen the risk of the prisoners starting to revolt against the government. ******* Day 3 Euro. 6:26 a.m. Euro. Paris, France. This place might have been one of the most popular travel destinations in the world due to its iconic spots before the outbreak. Now, however, it was one of the deadliest places in the world due to the overwhelming number of the infected. The large number of tourists did not help as manpower but just enforced the increase of the infected. The iconic spots were no more but an execution ground for the people who went this time to this city for their holidays. The number of mutated infected were also not small. This caused the government and armed forces to abandon the survivors of the city and evacuate using aerial means. They only issued an emergency evacuation once and did not plan to return anymore. Any survivor that were not able to aboard the evacuation vehicles were left to fend themselves. ******** Day 3 Euro. 7:02 a.m. Euro. Cairo, Egypt. The city was a lost cause. The infected caused havoc in the city and immediately spread without warning. As there were very few advantageous terrains to exploit within the city to fend off the infected, the citizens were forced to flee into the deserts around the city. Still, even if they managed to escape the city into the desert, their future was still bleak. Several groups that evacuated had not only perished due to exhaustion and the infected catching up to them. At this moment, larger variants of the insects and animals found in the desert started to appear and became a bigger threat to the survivors rather than the infected. ************** Day 3 Euro. 7:16 a.m. Euro. Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. The survivors in the city were devastated. There were large numbers of evacuees that fled across the city after the outbreak started and successfully managed to leave the city alive. However, on the third day of the outbreak, they found more pressing issues. Most of the survivors that fled the city went north, west and south, as there was only the ocean in the east. Those who fled to the ocean were only those who owned private boats and yachts, while larger passenger boats did not manage to leave the port before they were overwhelmed by the infected. Those who went to the other directions, the people with vehicles were fine, but those who did not could only flee through the forested areas of national parks that surrounded the city. They were fine in the first 2 days, but just the past night, mutated animals started attacking the fleeing survivors. Still, many of them managed to flee, but their conditions were the worst as they could have. Unfortunately for the survivors of this country, it was not the end of it. Just who did not know of the dangers one could encounter in the Australian deserts. Right at the moment, though, many of those sources of dangers already mutated and were moving towards the populated areas of the country. Day 3 Euro. 7:30 a.m. Euro. Beijing, China as the most populated country in the world. China did not fare any better in the face of the apocalypse. The infected came in large droves, pushing the military back. In actuality, the military actually managed to contain the outbreak in the initial stages due to the overwhelming number of soldiers dispatched to control the area. Unfortunately, as they started to gain control of the situation, the soldiers grew more and more complacent, which made them caught off guard as the mutated infected appeared. Due to the large population of the country, more varieties and more powerful mutated appeared. Furthermore, as the countries around China started to fall into the hands of the infected from those countries started to come in droves, entering the border of the country. It was unknown what was happening, but it was most like that the large population of China was taking the attention of the infected from outside the borders. At the moment, the military started to fell through the chaos, while the survivors within the city were starting to group up and build their own communities, trying to fight back the infected. Day 3 Euro. 7:32 a.m. Euro. Jeju Island, South Korea. It was a large island known for tourism in South Korea. However, it was now a place for carnage. As there was no place for the civilians to run to but the sea around the island, they were trapped. Only those locals who had means of transportation through the sea were able to leave the island. The smaller island to the east of Jeju became a haven for fleeing survivors as the mainland also started to fall apart. Day 3 Euro. 7:40 a.m. Euro. Tokyo, Japan. The JSDF had already abandoned the city. There were underground shelters prepared by the government, but the ones found in Tokyo already fell as the infected started to mutate. Chuobuhete, 2 artificial islands built to be a breakwater and was used for waste disposal since it was built begrudgingly, became one of the safest areas in Tokyo, and Wakasu, that was to the northeast of Chuobuhete, became the outpost of the military and the government. Both areas were connected by a long bridge. In terms of safety, Chuobuhete was safer than Wakasu, that was closer to the mainland, but of course, the elites of the society would not allow themselves to stay in an island used for waste disposal. Right at the moment, the JSDF planned to reclaim several artificial islands of Koto City to expand their area of operations. However, it would not be easy and no one was optimistic about the results. South of Tokyo, there were several more artificial islands that became evacuation zones like Ogashima, Daikokufuto and Minamihanmoku. Day 3 Euro. 7:40 a.m. Euro. Pyongyang, North Korea. The North Korean government also failed to successfully contain the outbreak in their country despite their overwhelming firepower. It might be the heavens' will, but 2 of the airplanes that fell in the city contained several powerful mutants that were able to stand against their military. Their military force took a heavy blow due to this. Out of desperation, the government officials started to hunker down inside their emergency shelters, which were not known to the public. In a more direct saying, they abandoned their citizens. In the end, the citizens started to take arms and managed to secure Turu-sam, Yonggakdo and Rungnado, which were all islands along Taedong River. 3 days into the apocalypse, many cities were almost destroyed. Still, the possibility of survivors hiding within these cities was high. There were countries where the government chose to abandon their people, forcing the populace to stand up, while there were countries where the authorities continued to stand over the masses and fulfill their duties. However, counting all the survivors in the world right at the moment, the world population already lost its 60% and was still increasing. It was due to the fact that there were still places that the infected had not invaded yet. After the infected had taken over the whole world, just how many people would be able to survive, no one knows. Day 3 Euro. 5:40 a.m. Euro. Meadowwood Avenue, Panapon 8, Bacoor City, Cavite, Philippines. Splash. The dirty red-tinted puddle of rainwater let out a splashing sound as the wheel of a refitted MB Sprinter armored van ran over it. The attachments of the refitted vehicle had red splotches dripping on them, especially the V-shaped ram in front. Inside the car, Mark sat behind the passenger's seat while peering through the tinted window. He could see the remains of the outbreak from this side. Despite the fact that the rain water had already washed the majority of it, Mark could still make out the splashes of blood on the walls and the street. On the first day, Mark had already expected that it would rain. It seemed that the rain started to fall when Mark fell unconscious and did not notice it either as they holed up in the mall doing all the preparations yesterday. The rain continued to fall until past midnight the previous night. He only noticed the fact that it was raining when the military rescue squads entered the basement parking with wet attires and vehicles. At the time of their departure from the mall, it was easy since the number of infected blocking their vehicle was significantly lower as most of the infected that gathered around the mall went after the military rescue convoy that left before them. Still, it was not easy for them to go out of the vicinity of the highway. The traffic jam left during the start of the outbreak gave them a lot of headache. They had to slow down pushing the vehicles to the side as they had to traverse 4 lanes of lined-up cars of all sizes. Some of the larger vehicles like buses and trucks were even left blocking other cars and they had to maneuver around these vehicles. During these times, they had to slow down and of course, they got surrounded by more than a dozen of infected. Even though it was a smaller number than it was supposed to be in the previous days, it was still a large number. That moment, Mark had a practice session with one of the M16 assault rifles given to them and a new partner of his. A larger and sturdier machete he got from the mall storage. The machete he snatched from the gangsters already fulfilled its duty and abandoned back there in the mall as it was smaller and the blades were already filled with nicks and cracks due to overuse. The guns they got from Captain Theo were all paired with silencers, perfect for use during the apocalypse. Mark just wished that they had given them a little more variety of weapons or at least newer models. These M16 assault rifles were the standard issue in the military and was already overused in the past decades. While other countries were on the path of developing their own weapons and war vehicles, their country was still using these older models and were happy receiving handovers from larger countries. Mark really found this frustrating. Mark also hoped that those guys in uniform gave them other military equipment like night vision goggles and Kevlar vests. Even though the Kevlar vests would not really work much against the infected, it could at least lessen the threat they would receive from other survivors who held ill intent. The only things they got from the military were guns and ammunition after all. It looked like that the military were not only lacking in manpower but also equipment. The only thing they had more of was weapons. After a little bit of trouble and shooting session, they finally managed to get off the highway and entered the branching road just before the electricity distribution office Mark had been to the other day. At that time, it was brimming with people but now, the front glass walls and doors of the office were smashed and blood and flesh from the edges of the broken glass were obvious. Back to the scenery the vehicle had driven past, the signs the outbreak left were plenty. There were a lot of abandoned houses and those houses that had windows without railings to cover were broken down. Dismantled body parts and decapitated corpses littered the street. There was also a lot of garbage scattered on the road. While Mark was peering by the window, there were times he could detect people of some of the houses as they drove through the street. Some of these people were even peering at their second-floor windows as they heard a vehicle passing through. It looked like that some of them even had the notion to call for help but held back as to not gather the attention of the infected. There were also those who actually shouted to ask for help but the people inside the van would not hear their shouts due to soundproofing. Inside the car, only Mark could detect their intentions. Of course, he disregarded their pleas. He did not choose to venture this dangerous world for them but to find his friends. If he started to help one of these people he did not even know, more and more would come until they were overwhelmed and could not control the situation anymore. That was just how people were after all. Bam! A face appeared in front of Mark before getting left by the vehicle. It was not a human or a purposely planned jump scare. It was an infected that got swept to the side by the V-shaped ram in front of the car. The infected was hit hard that its body bounced off the vehicle it hit that they just passed and splattered its face in front of Mark. Of course, the hard-to-scare Mark did not even put the event in his eyes. His eyelids did not even twitch. As the scenery of houses they passed by was redundant, Mark grew tired of watching through the window. When he turned back his thoughts into the vehicle, he saw that all of them with Odalina as the driver as the exception was staring at him. "What's wrong with you all?" His eyes swept over them. May was sitting to his right while Abigail would not give up her space, which was over Mark's lap. Odalina's children, Odette and Siegfried, were sitting on the sofa in front of them. The children were twins, both 9 years old. It was also not hard where Odalina found the names for these two children. Gerger, it's because you're spacing out. I'm not. I'm just watching the scenery outside. Gerger, that's really not good scenery. May smiled wryly. What Mark was looking at was not good scenery but scenes of carnage. Mark dismissed what she said by patting her head, making her stop speaking. This girl really liked being patted on her head other than hugging. He then looked at Odalina's children. He could sense that they were hesitating about something. What do you two want? Get on with it. Siegfried and Odette looked at each other and nodded. Siegfried then spoke. We asked Mom before why she was calling you Master, and she said that it was you, Uncle, who saved her. We wanted to thank you, but you're not going to make Mom do bad things, right? Peeved. Mark almost laughed. One was because he was actually called Uncle, but he gave it a sudden thought and actually found it reasonable. Most of his peers had already started to have families and children several years ago. Their children might have been around these children's age already. It was just him who kept on staying single and was aiming to become a wizard. The other was that he did not even want to accept this self-proclaimed servant of his, but she just kept pushing herself under him. Why would he make her do something bad other than killing the infected and humans who would become threat to their group in the future? In the end, he just told the two. I won't. Then, you have our gratitude. The two children lowered their heads, making Mark and May bewildered. Mark looked at Odalina, who was driving, and said, Just how did you raise these two? Odalina, who was glancing at the rearview mirror, saw the spectacle as she drove the vehicle, just giggled. I already told you before, Master, it just run in our family. Behaving like servants. Yes, behaving like servants. Mark and May did not know how to react to this. Odalina's children were also confused. It was normal for them to behave like this and did not understand what Mark was talking about. Abigail, on the other hand, was just quietly listening to their conversation, snuggling on her papa's body. Mark looked at her. She looked really bored. With that, Mark lifted her and made her sit down on his seat. Stay here for a bit. May and the children watched him as he made his way to the back of the vehicle and rummaged on the things he brought from the tech zone. Soon, he took out a laptop and turned it on. He then copied several files on 5 of the phones he brought. After that, he plugged a wireless router on the socket where the refrigerator was plugged in, put the router on top of the fridge. When he got back, he brought the 5 phones and handed 4 to May and the children. The phone had only one game installed, and it was a game released in the 2009 and was kept on being updated even before the outbreak. Soon, laughter and panicked shouting was heard inside the vehicle as the group was immersed in playing the game, where they needed to build things using blocky resources found with the game and battling monsters during the night. Papa! Help! Abigail shouted as her character was being shot by blocky skeletons using bows and arrows. Laughing, Siegfried and Odette's characters went to help the little girl while Mark was shooting the skeletons back on top base they just built. Odalina was glancing at the rearview mirror with envy. She wanted to join in, but as the driver, she could not. Ever since the outbreak, she had not seen her children laugh like this, making her even more eager to join them. Mark, who started the game, knew that he succeeded in his scheme. It was killing 2 birds, no, 4 birds with 1 stone. First was to relieve the boredom brought by the slow travel. Second was to remove the wariness of Odalina's children towards them. For the third was to reduce the stress the apocalypse brought to everyone, and the last one was to bring the group together. Just who said that playing games was just a waste of time? Still, if others saw them like this, they would think that they were looking at a group of lunatics. This group was actually having fun while others were doing their best to survive. Day 3 €, 6:30 AM €, Niag Road, Mombog IV, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark's vehicle stopped by the street. Before the outbreak, getting this far from the city mall would only take about 15 minutes. Now, however, it took them about an hour due to the flooded parts of the road, obstacles on the way and turning around to find other ways due to heavily blocked roads. Mark went down the vehicle and took care of the infected around. The number of infected in this part of the road was way smaller as the area was surrounded by vacant plots of land used for farming and rearing animals. After dealing with the infected, he finally looked around. He could see how much the world had changed after the outbreak. Like what the military disclosed, even plants were affected by the mutagen and were slowly evolving. The lush green plants at the vacant plots of land were strong evidence. Back then, before the outbreak, which was just 2 days ago, Mark saw this plot of land from the road on the other side of the plot since the public transport he rode to the electricity distribution office passed on that road. Before, the plants in these plots had just been harvested. But now, the grass and wild plants were now about to reach his knee in height. Mark looked past the plot of land towards the wide road going to the east. Far past through that road, several large buildings were vaguely in sight. It was their first destination, the Bakor City Hall. The nearest person to find in Mark's list should be around here. However, Mark felt that it was dangerous to blindly enter the area. It was the reason they stopped here. The perimeter of the City Hall was covered in overgrowth of plants, and right where the main building of the City Hall was built, there were a large tree towering over the buildings. The roots and branches of the tree even stuck out of the walls of the building. The City Hall was a 4-story building and the tree was 1 or 2 story higher. This would be tricky. I just wish that she's still alive in there. Mark muttered as he observed the place using a pair of binoculars. Day 3 a Euro. 6:35 am a Euro. Nyog Road, Mombogaiv, Bakor City, Kaviti. While Mark was observing the perimeters of the target location, Odalina and the others also went out of the vehicle. They were looking at the huge tree in the distance with amazement. Odalina, though, thought the same as Mark. That looked dangerous, is it not? She stood beside him and asked Mark. It was not just the tree that she was talking about, but also the number of infected in the area. As the City Hall, there were many people in this place before the apocalypse. Among all those people, everyone knew that the majority of these people already turned into Z-types. They could even see some of the infected wandering aimlessly at the entrance of the compound. Just get back in the car first. I have a plan. When everyone was back inside the car, Mark remained outside and opened the back of the car. He pulled out a large box and brought it inside. The box contained the camera-mounted drone Mark brought. He immediately set up the drone with the help of the others and connected the video feed into the large monitor mounted on the back of the car along with the entertainment system. It took them about half an hour to set it up and Mark went out to launch the drone. He then went back in the car to see the feed while controlling the drone. Day 3 a Euro. 7:10 am a Euro. Bakor City Hall, Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bakor City, Kaviti. A white quadcopter with a camera mounted beneath it was circling the perimeter of the tree while checking if there was any danger in approaching it. After the quadcopter finally figured that the tree did not seem to be dangerous, the drone went closer and went to check the City Hall in a clearer view. As the quadcopter was creating noises, it could not be helped if that it attracted the Z-types around. To evade the pursuit of the infected, the drone flew up and descended in another area to continue the reconnaissance. The traces of devastating events that happened within the past 2 days were left in the open. Rows of vehicles were left in the parking lots while the glass walls of the mail building were broken into pieces. The government vehicles were left in the middle of the roads. It was obvious that they tried to escape, but the traces of blood on the vehicles showed how they failed to do so. Around the compound, a large number of infected gathered, many of which were wearing uniforms of government workers, while there were also quite a number of infected in police uniforms. But what stood out among the infected were those odd-looking ones. Their movements were very slow, even slower than the Z-type B, which was the eaters. What made them very noticeable was their skin that looked like the bark of a tree. The eyes of these infected were also green-colored compared to the normal counterparts, which had pure white pupils. Back inside the car, Mark and the gang were watching the monitor. Even the docile biter they brought along and was tied in the very last seat at the back was looking at the monitor. When they saw the infected that had tree bark skin, they all thought that the reason for this mutation was that huge tree in the middle of the compound. Mark controlled the drone and the scene at the back of the main building was revealed on their eyes. It was then that they saw it. It was an 8 or 9 foot humanoid that had a body made of a tree and was even shaped like a tree. It even had leaves on its head and hands and roots for its foot. Rather than a zombie, it more looked like a tree ant from fantasy stories. If not for the figure of a person plastered on the center of its body, Mark would have really thought so. The figure looked the same as the tree bark skinned infected at the previous location. The person's back was connected and was hanging on the wooden body and arms through root-like veins. When the figure moved, the wooden body also moved, mimicking the movements of the figure. As the wooden body was stiff, it walked like a penguin, swaying side by side as it moved. The huge mutant then stopped and the person looked up to the drone monitoring it. Then it decided to ignore the drone and looked up to the huge tree as if it was waiting for something. The people inside the car gasped at the appearance of the mutant. It was fortunate that Mark decided to scout the area using the drone first rather than blindly driving into the compound. Looking at the figure, a sudden thought entered his mind and it even made him mutter. A level 2. What did you say? Gurgur. Even though he muttered the words softly, May, who was always sticking close to him, heard his voice. Nothing. Mark decided to not say what had just entered his mind as it was not confirmed and he did not know where the thought came from either. It was as if someone whispered the idea to him. As the mutant was behaving strangely, Mark decided to control the drone and look at what the mutant was looking at. There, he saw a single nut-shaped fruit on a branch of the huge tree. The fruit seemed to be the same size as a baseball and was emitting a faint golden glow. Seeing the fruit on the monitor, Abigail and Odalina gulped for some reason. What's wrong with you two? Mark noticed the abrupt change in the mental fluctuation of the two and asked. Papa, I want to eat that. Abigail directly said without any thoughts. Odalina on the other hand explained what she felt briefly. She was red in the face though as she knew that she lost her composure in front of everyone. Master, I don't know why but something tells me that that fruit is edible and highly beneficial to us. Hearing what she said, Mark looked at the screen. He controlled the drone once more and looked at the huge mutant that continued to stare at the fruit. He then decided, all right, we'll try to get that later. With what he said, Abigail and Odalina felt delighted. While Mark was controlling the drone, he noticed some commotion on the highest floor of the city hall. Mark made the drone fly closer to the windows and saw people inside. The people were also watching the drone with hopeful expressions. The drone flew across the row of windows and stopped at a certain spot. Found her. Mark said. What was shown in the monitor was a 24-year-old female. Her looks were above average and could be considered beautiful to certain standards. Now, however, she looked really dispirited, thin and weak. She noticed the drone flying by the window and she only stared at the spot she was sitting and did not bother to stand up. Looking at her, Mark felt his heart being torn. Was it really the lively girl he treated as his little sister before? It was then Mark remembered. This girl had type 2 diabetes and she had been taking medicine ever since the time he knew her and her older sister. Since she was trapped here, it was likely that she had not been able to take her medicine in the past 2 days. It was also possible that she had not been eating well these previous days. Is she who you were looking for, Master? Odalina asked and May also had the same question. Their eyes were filled with pity. If that woman was who Mark was looking for, then, they should take her as soon as possible. Looking at her figure, her condition was not looking good. I need to contact her. That was what filled his mind. Mark made the drone look around through the window once more. The number of people inside was about 30 or lesser. There were also a few men wearing police uniforms. Among the people, he saw someone familiar. It was the current Congresswoman of the District 2 of Bacoor. Along with police and a few men that looked like her bodyguards, she tried to approach the window the drone was peering through. Mark felt that he should not be bothered with these people and made the drone fly away. He needed to scout the place thoroughly and find the entrances and exits before going in for the rescue. He also planned to lure the infected away using the drone to make the rescue easier. He made the drone enter the main building from the broken glass windows of the second floor. Luckily, the ceilings were higher, else the drone might have already been caught by the infected. The whole place was a mess. The tables were overturned, papers and office wares littered the hallways and rooms, and there were bloody mess in every place. He soon found the stairs, which was the main access to all the floors. He then found out the reason why the infected was not able to enter the higher floors, leaving the third and the fourth floor fully intact. It was because the large roots of the huge tree were blocking the stairs going to the higher floors. This meant that they would also not be able to use the stairs to pick her up. Mark made the drone leave the building and find another way. The camera then panned towards the sides of the city hall. Both the northern and southern part of the third floor had a suspended pathway that connected the city hall to the gymnasium at the north and the Bako or police command center at the south. These places were the only ways they could find in order to enter the third floor of the city hall. Mark made the drone fly to the entrances and saw the doors, which were locked. It was no problem for Mark, as he could just bust their way in as long as he managed to access the buildings. Circling the city hall once more, he finally found an entry into the building for the drone. It was a large open crack at the ceiling on top of the building where the huge tree had grown. Mark made the drone enter the building. It was kind of tricky, but Mark's years of accumulated experience in playing games came in handy as he used the controller skillfully. Soon, he found the area where the survivors gathered. It seemed that the people inside were alarmed as they heard the buzzing sound coming from the propellers of the drone. The police and the bodyguards had even drawn their guns and were ready to shoot at any moment they noticed something wrong. The people inside panicked as they heard the sound coming from the hallway and was entering their resting area. Even if they said that it was their resting area, it was actually the waiting area in this floor and could be openly accessed from the hallway. As they heard the buzzing sound, the non-combatants started to scurry away while the police and the congresswoman's bodyguards were ready to fight. There was one exception though. It was the 20-something-year-old woman who was far too weak to move. She was just by the entrance, and if any danger was really in the hallway, she would be the first to be implicated. The woman was also frightened when she heard the sound, but she was really weak to move, and it seemed that the people around did not even bother to help her. She was about to cry. She just came to this place to renew some of her papers for employment when the outbreak happened. It was lucky that she was able to escape and survive until now. Right at the moment, she was feeling the full brunt of her illness as she was not able to take her insulin shots since the outbreak started. She actually brought some when she came to this place. She always brought a bottle everywhere she goes. Unfortunately, she lost her bag along with all her belongings when the apocalypse came. Without any energy to move, she resigned herself to her fate. She heard the buzzing sound stop in front of her as she closed her eyes. However, she waited, but nothing happened after a few seconds. She then heard a voice. "Geez, you already managed to survive this long. Don't you dare give up on me." It was a familiar voice, but she could not remember whose voice this belonged to anymore. She opened her eyes and looked up and saw the thing that was creating the buzzing sound and the voice. It was the drone she saw from the window. Underneath the drone, there was a camera which was obviously filming her. Just behind the camera, there was a small radio taped on the drone. "I'll land the drone, so take the radio underneath it." She heard the voice once more and the drone slowly landed in front of her. In her confusion, she followed the instructions and removed the radio from the drone. "Good," the voice said, coming from the radio. Who are you?" She spoke on the radio. There was no answer. "I can't hear what you are saying." Push the button at the side of the radio when talking. She followed the instruction and asked the same question. Then the answer came. "I'm hurt." "Well, It's been a long time. About 7 years, I think. 7 years, she thought. Then the image of a person entered her mind. He was the person who cherished her at those times. Due to some deep reasons, he avoided them and they lost connection with him. Tears welled up in her eyes, as she asked on the radio. Big brother. Then a snicker came from the radio. It's good that you still remember me. Anyways, I came to pick you up, Charm. Day 3 €, 7:43 a.m. €, Bacoor City Hall 4th floor, Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bacoor City, Cavite. Charmaine looked at the radio in her hand, shocked. He came to pick me up. Why? How did he find me? Those questions echoed in her mind, but she did not have much thought to voice it. She also wanted to get out of this hellhole. But then she remembered why they were trapped in here in the first place. Big brother. Don't come here, it's dangerous. She shouted her concern. What a good girl. She already felt weak and did not have the ability to escape this place without the help of others, but she still did not want to implicate anyone. Especially since this big brother of hers who did not have contact with them in the past years actually came to look for her. There was a lot of infected outside the building and around the compound. There were also those tree people and the larger tree person roaming the street. Charmaine then heard his reply. I already saw the situation and I already thought of a plan to pick you up. I'll be there in several minutes. Keep the radio with you, all right? The drone that landed in front of her then started to fly up with buzzing sounds coming from its 4 propellers. Mark controlled the drone to fly while he saw Charmaine watching the drone as it took off. However, the drone just managed to take flight to a certain height when someone snatched the radio out of Charmaine's hand and even pushed her away. Mark frowned. He was furious. The person that snatched the radio was a man. The man stared at the camera on the drone and spoke at the radio. Hey, what about us? You have to help us. What a thick face. After what the man did to Charmaine, he was actually looking hopefully at the camera. Unfortunately, the reply he received was enough to give him chills in his spine. When I arrive there, the first thing I will do is kill you. The voice was calm and detached, but that just added to the threat factor of the reply. The man stepped back in fear, but he soon regained his composure. He actually got scared of a threat. He felt shame and then the shame turned to anger. He smashed the radio to the floor in front of the camera and ran off. Charmaine, teary-eyed, crawled towards the broken radio. They tried to put the radio piece by piece, but of course, it could not be fixed just like that. From the scene in the monitor, everyone in the vehicle looked furious. Even the always silent Abigail looked at Mark and asked, Are we going to kill that bad man, Papa? Her papa did not answer, but the furious look on his face surely judged the fate of that man later. Looking at the pitiful appearance of Charmaine in the monitor, Mark could not hold back anymore and wanted to charge to that place as soon as possible. It was then that a woman approached Charmaine in panic and pulled her back to spot where she was resting before. The woman looked like she was in her late 20s and was wearing a nurse uniform. Mark did not saw this woman from the window earlier. Looking at her panic at Charmaine's pitiful appearance as she tried to fix the radio while glancing at the drone warily, it looked like she did not know what happened just now. Under Charmaine's stare and the nurse's wary glances, the drone turned around while remaining in place. It looked like whoever was controlling the drone was checking the place. It then stopped while looking at the man who stood behind the congresswoman's group. The congresswoman had a complicated look on her face. She also had the notion to ask for help from the person who was controlling the drone. She was waiting for the right timing and to politely ask the man on the radio for help. Since the weakened woman on the floor was still talking to the radio, the congresswoman patiently waited. However, before she could make a move, the man just now turned the situation awry. Still, she could not do anything to the man. That man was the owner of a known private-owned enterprise here in Bacoor and had large dealings with the local government. Furthermore, the man had relatives within the government and their position was higher than what she had as a congresswoman. The congresswoman sighed. She knew that the chances of getting help now were very slim. Even the people around them had complicated faces as they looked at the man. If he wanted to dig a grave for himself, why also drag them into it? The policemen and the bodyguards of the congresswoman were also boiling inside as they glanced at the man by the side of their eyes. If the congresswoman were to order it, they would not hesitate to shoot this aggravating person. The drone then flew away back to where it came from under everyone's gazes. They all knew that the person behind that drone would come here sooner or later. The man who smashed the radio had a different opinion though. With the number of infected inside, the person behind that drone would surely die before he could even enter the building. He was hoping that it would happen. He did not want to admit or show it in his face, but there was something that gave him fear when he heard the voice from that radio making him disoriented and act without thinking. Back inside the vehicle, Mark was getting ready. The others were also helping Abigail ready herself. For this operation, Mark was going with Abigail. For sure, he needed to carry Charmaine and his fighting capability would be hindered severely. In that case, he needed to bring someone and the only possible person to bring was Abigail. Still, she might just be a little girl, but her physical fighting prowess might even be higher than her papa. Odalina was in charge of driving the vehicle of course, and May was in charge of luring the infected away from the extraction point. How? She will be using the drone. Right now, May was the one controlling the drone back to the car. It was a form of practice for her as they needed someone to take on the role. May was also eager to do it as she wanted to help even just with a little thing. She did not want to be just a baggage for the group. Mark wore a black jacket as always, but the one he was wearing right now had several pockets on the chest, abdomen and the sides. He was still wearing the security belt and he put several things on the open pockets of the belt. On his arm, Mark wore a metal forearm guards locked with a buckle. These arm guards was something he made using the same materials they used in refitting the vehicle. On his head, he wore a skate helmet and a pair of clear goggles for his eyes. He also had his mouth covered with a motorcycle face mask. Abigail on the other hand was wearing a frilled dress. Even back in the mall, this girl did not really want to wear anything else other than this style of clothes. She said that her mommy always bought her clothes like this before. As the little girl would not relent about it, her papa just decided to make her several kinds of equipment suitable for her. As Mark observed about Abigail, she did not really use her arms when fighting. What she mainly used was her legs. He also saw that even if her physical strength was high, it was not her forte but her speed. With these traits, Mark modified a pair of shoes for her and added metal fittings around the sole with a rubber inner side lessen the force of impact received by her feet. He also made sure that the fittings were sturdy but would not hinder the little girl's movements. He also made a pair of metal fitted gloves and a pair of smaller metal arm guards for the little girl. For her head, she wore a skate helmet designed for children. She did not want to wear anything on her face for some reason, so Mark did not force her to do so. For the weapons, Mark was bringing his machete, a silenced assault rifle and a silenced pistol, while Mark made Abigail bring a pistol just in case. Even if the little girl was not trained for it, it would sure come in handy. Mark also brought a backpack with ready-to-eat high-calorie but low-sugar food and drinks. He could at least feed Charmaine before bringing her out. He wanted to prepare some Molotovs, but he had no gasoline to use to fill the bottles. Diesel could not be used as it was combustible rather than flammable. He could only bring 2 spray canisters of butane he brought that was supposed to be used to refill lighters. About the fruit that Odalina and Abigail wanted, he decided to bring it up for later. Right now, getting Charmaine out of there was the priority. It was now time to move out. Around the compound, a quadcopter drone was flying low, about 8 feet from the ground, while slowly moving around the street. It started to gather the attention of the infected. Those who were attracted to the drone were mostly biters, while the slower eaters did not seem to care. It was just like how Mark observed these infected. The biters were sensitive to any kind of sound, but the eaters would only have reaction towards human voices. That was why a radio was attached under the drone and was turned into full volume. Voices of two children were heard from the radio, attracting the eaters around the drone. The two voices came from Odalina's children. They were in charge of making more noise around the drone. The pace of the drone was slow, but it was effective to some extent as the eaters were slow moving in the first place. Inside the city hall, one of the survivors noticed the commotion outside and called the attention of the other survivors. When the others looked at the road in front of the city hall, they saw a large procession. No, it was not a procession, but actually dozens of infected being led by a very familiar drone. They all watched as the drone led the dozens of infected away. As the crowd grew larger and larger, there would be stragglers. It was also obvious that some of the infected noticed that the drone was something that they could not bite and left the crowd. Still, most of the infected followed the drone, and most of them were the fast-running infected. They all watched the drone lead the infected away until they could not see the drone anymore after it went behind the building through the northern side. Then, they saw a vehicle coming from the direction of the boulevard. It was a large black van with metal fittings around it. The solar panels on the roof of the vehicle and the wide V-shaped ram in front of it could also be seen. They could not see the inside of the vehicle though. It was not because they were high up, but because the windows of the vehicle were heavily tinted. The remaining infected on the way rushed towards the vehicle, but they were decimated as the vehicle mercilessly crashed on their frail bodies. The V-shaped ram pushed the zombies to the side with great force, leaving their bodies with injuries worse than before. Under the gazes of the people watching by the windows, the vehicle followed the same route the drone took but stopped in front of the gymnasium. When it stopped, two people came out of the vehicle, a man and a small girl. The man was armed with an assault rifle and was accurately shooting the infected rushing towards them. The two ran towards the office building attached to the gymnasium and entered it. When the two entered, the vehicle made a U-turn and went back the way it came from. Day 3 €, 8:14 am €, Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bacoor City, Cavite. After getting ready, Mark sat beside the door of the vehicle with Abigail beside him. May and the two kids were intently watching the monitor as May unskillfully maneuvered the drone over the infected. About 10 minutes after May and the children started luring the infected away, she finally managed to lure the majority of the infected in front of the city hall towards the back of the building. It was then that Odalina stepped on the gas pedal and drove the vehicle towards their destination. Along the road, Odalina mercilessly mowed down the infected that blocked the path of the car. The vehicle would rock every now and then, but there were times that the shaking was unbearable. Those situations happened when Odalina ran over the infected with wood-like skin. It felt like they were ramming the car on something very heavy, like a small tree. Adding these infected to his list, Mark decided to call them the Woodmen. Arriving at the destination, which was the office area of the gymnasium at the north of the city hall, Mark quickly opened the door and bolted off. He started shooting the incoming infected, specifically the biters, as they moved closer than the other infected. Mark's eyes became sharper and his movements became faster. He was using his adrenaline rush. He aimed at the heads of the infected as accurate as he could. Also, with the short distance between him and the infected, it was unlikely for him to miss his shots too much. It was not like he was aiming as several hundred meters away with his bare eyes. He would surely miss if that was the case. While Mark was shooting the infected, he and Abigail entered the broken glass walls of the office reception. It was then that Odalina moved according to the plan. She made a U-turn with the vehicle and sped off out of the compound. It was to ensure that the vehicle would not get swarmed over by the infected just because they had to wait for Mark and Abigail. Going back to the place where they parked the vehicle earlier, Odalina started to do other things Mark ordered her to. It was to teach May and her children at least how to fire a pistol. When Mark asked her before if she could use a gun, she readily nodded. It was because one of her late husband's hobbies was hanging out on a shooting clubs and practicing shooting with any kind of gun. Before they had their children, there were several times that he would bring her along with him and taught him how to. As they had just returned from the compound, it could not be helped that there were infected chasing after their vehicle. Using a pistol, Odalina unhesitatingly shot the biters closing in without batting an eyelid. She left the slow-moving ones for the training of the three. Looking at her skills when shooting the biters, it was obvious that she had a higher level of gun skills compared to Mark. Odalina taught the three how to shoot the gun one by one. Of course, it could not be done in one session. May and her children were flinching for every shot they made with the pistol. There was another thing to May though. It seemed that she could use the pistol crossbow Mark made for her than the gun. She managed to kill several eaters when she used the crossbow, but she missed all her shots with the gun. The children also managed to shoot the gun at the zombies, but the ratio of the shot hitting the infected was very low. In the end, the arm of the children had already become sore due to the recoil of the gun, and Odalina had to finish the remaining infected by herself. As the eaters were not really much of a threat, a gray gauntlet made of gray bone slowly emerged from Odalina's hands and she started punching the infected. The punches looked clumsy, but as a mutator, her strength was not a joke. When they cleared all the infected around them, May rushed back to the vehicle to monitor the situation around the city hall. She launched the drone she made to land on the rooftop of the gymnasium once more and patrolled the area. When she saw the situation, she panicked as she immediately reached for the radio. While Odalina and the rest had good time learning how to use a pistol, the situation on Mark and Abigail's side was not that smooth sailing. The infected outside the office were flocking into the office without stop. The sounds created by the pieces of glass walls on the floor being stepped on by the infected coming in were attracting even more infected. The M16 assault rifle he was using, even if equipped with a suppressor, was still making sounds enough to attract the infected nearby. Mark continuously shot the infected as they retreated further inside the office. Even while he was shooting the infected, there were still times that one or two would still manage to come closer to them at directions he was not facing. At those situations, a red blurry shadow would charge at the incoming infected. By the time Mark faced the infected that came closer, he saw Abigail's shoe planted on the infected's face, snapping its head backwards. However, it was not the large number of infected that gave them the worst headache, it was the woodmen. As they were closer, Mark could see the features of the woodmen clearly. Their skin totally turned into wood with the texture of a tree bark. They were slow, even slower than the eaters. It looked like that their wood-like bodies were hindering them from moving freely. It was fine since the woodmen were slow, but the problem here was their skin being too sturdy and thick, like a tree. Their bodies were also too heavy. Another thing was their mouths were non-existent. Mark could not think of where these mutated infected was able to get the energy to move. Photosynthesis? Mark did not know they did not seem to have leaves on their bodies though. Two woodmen blocked them from going further into the hallway. Mark shot a single burst onto one of the woodmen's head, but the shot mutated infected only staggered backwards without even falling. It regained its balance and continued moving towards Mark. He could see the bullets being stuck on its forehead and the white-colored blood flowing out of its wounds. Rather than blood, it looked more like tree sap. A biter came rushing from the reception area of the office, making Mark turn back to deal with the biter. As the biter was too close, Mark did not use the long-bodied rifle but slashed the biter, decapitating its head. Mark turned back at the two woodmen and hacked the neck of the nearest one with the machete. It almost made him curse. Tisk. The sensation it gave him as the machete made contact with the woodman's neck was the same sensation he felt when he was chopping firewood. It did not only fail to hack its head off, but the machete almost got stuck. At that moment, Abigail charged with fast speed towards the woodman. She jumped towards the wall and used it to propel herself to the side of the woodman and kicked it on the part of its head where the ears should be located. The kicked woodman was pushed back by the impact of the kick and staggered. However, it still did not fall down. What tenacity! Still, the impact by the kick still pushed it enough for Mark and Abigail to slip past the hallway. It was a good thing though. With the heavy and sturdy woodman blocking the hallway, it would be harder for the infected outside to chase after them. Mark and Abigail entered a wide corridor. He knew they were near the area behind the stage inside the gymnasium. The stairs going up should be just around the corner. Why did he know? He had entered this place several times before. Most of the time it happened was before local elections in the past years. As they were about to continue running, the radio in Mark's belt vibrated. He hacked an incoming eater's neck and took out the radio. "Mayor? Is something wrong?" He just finished his question when he immediately heard May's panicked voice. "Gerger, hurry and escape. The large infected behind the city hall is coming your direction." What? Mark was surprised. They had not even arrived at the stairs up to the second floor. Furthermore, the suspended pathway that connected this building to the city hall was all the way to the third floor. "Gerger, hurry. It's already nearby the corner of the city hall." "Mayor, I won't turn off the radio, so update me with the situation." "Okay." Mark stored the radio back into his belt but did not turn it off or muted it. He then turned to the little girl. "Gail, you heard her. We're going to speed up." The little girl nodded. Even if Mark said that to Abigail, he knew that the only one who needed to speed up was him. The father and daughter duo ran towards the stairs and climbed it. As they were halfway to the second floor, an eater came shambling towards them from the second floor. Mark dodged sideways and kicked the eater's back, making the infected tumble down to the end of the stairs below. The eater's head strongly slammed onto the floor, creating a bloody mess. As they were in a hurry, Mark did not spend his time on killing the infected on the way. He would just kick their knees and legs, making them fall onto the floor, and continued running. May continued on relaying the situation outside as they ran. When he reached the third floor, he heard May. "Gerger, it's already outside the building you are in. It's trying to reach the pathway." "Well, sh*t." Mark and Abigail rushed across the hallway of the third floor. Luckily, as the third floor, there were almost no infected inside. They only encountered 2 eaters before they found the door to the pathway. The door was locked, but they could hear a banging sound coming from the outside. "It's smashing the foundation of the pathway. Gerger, hurry up. There are cracks on the foundation already." Time was the essence. Mark unleashed a burst of shots on the lock of the door and kicked it open. When the door opened, he could feel the floor shaking. Bam! Bam! "What the hell does it want from us? It should go back on guarding that fruit," Mark said as he could see some leaves sticking from the outside of the pathway. He was sure that it was the leafy head of the level 2 mutation woodman. "Gail, we're running." Despite the shaking pathway and the loud banging sounds from below, they started running across the suspended pathway. As they ran across, Mark looked to his left and could see the mutant woodman staring at him from below. What the heck? Mark was sure that it was staring at him. Its stare was even following him as ran across. However, the actions of the mutant woodman did not conform to the normal behavior of the infected. It saw Mark and Abigail running but did not blindly chase them. It actually continued smashing on the foundation of the pathway. It even smashed harder as it saw the two. Mark almost lost balance and had to grab the railing beside him due to the extreme shaking of the pathway. The cement on the floor even started to crack. Not good. Despite the loss of balance, Mark continued to push on without looking back. He could hear the loud smashing behind him and even started to hear creaking sounds as the metal supports of the pathway started to lose its foundation. "Papa, hurry up! Gerger!" Mark could hear the shouting of Abigail, who should have already run towards the other end of the pathway but ran back to him, and May, who was watching from the vehicle using the drone that came flying just a meter to his right. He looked at Abigail for a bit and felt a little amazed and even envious. The little girl was not even a little bit affected by the shaking. By the time he managed to get to the end of the pathway, the foundation crumbled. The heavy remains of the foundation pulled the rest of the pathway down, almost breaking its connection to the building beside the gymnasium. The cement floor on the pathway also crumbled as the metal supports started to twist. Mark looked at the destroyed pathway. He did not feel nervous, but it was still a dangerous situation. This pathway could not be used anymore. Seeing that the prey successfully traversed the pathway, the mutant woodman seemed to have lost interest for some reason. Mark and the mutant woodman stared at each other for a few seconds. He actually had the notion to give the aggravating infected with a few shots of his assault rifle, but stopped as it did not seem to have interest to continue attacking. Leaving the staring contest, Mark entered the door behind him with Abigail after bashing the lock open. Day 3 a Euro. 7:43 a.m. a Euro. Bacoor City Hall 4th floor, Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark and Abigail entered the 4th floor of the City Hall. Even with the fact that the suspended pathway could be accessed at the 3rd floor of the gymnasium office building, it was directly connected to the highest floor of the City Hall. The reason for this was the difference in elevation of the two buildings. The City Hall was built about a floor lower than the gymnasium. Looking at the scene inside the building, it did not look like the building was implicated by the apocalypse. Rather, the scene inside the building looked like it just experienced a magnitude 7 earthquake. The floor and walls had cracks, the floor had risen and sunken parts. Even the back part of the floor was obviously slanted. The glass dividers of the rooms were broken and the cabinets and tables were toppled. And the culprit of what happened to the building was visible from Mark and Abigail's point of view. At the straight hallway, they could see the large tree trunk that even blocked half of the corridor. Not only that, the part of the trunk that they could see was just about a quarter of the whole trunk. The remaining part of the trunk was hidden behind the ruined walls. By the looks of it, the huge tree tore its way out almost at the center of the building. There were even the marks left behind by the tree's branches as it tore its way through the ceiling. Before proceeding, Mark checked his equipment. He still had several clips of ammunition, but he already used up a third of all the 5.56mm caliber ammunition he brought. He drank a half bottle of cold water and gave the half to Abigail, which she calmly drank. It was good that he did not use PEP bottles as water container but vacuum-insulated water bottles. He brought 5 of these bottles in his backpack, 2 for cold water, 2 for heated water, and the last one for low-sugar soda. Mark switched the half-full clip of his M16 to a full one and started to move. He was sure that this floor was devoid of infected as he managed to navigate the drone here without problems, and the survivors here were openly on this floor. When they arrived near the trunk of the tree, Mark started to be careful with his footing. The floor was too uneven and the parts of the floor that had cracks looked like it would crumble any moment. As the two passed by the trunk, they could not help but stop and look at the trunk with curiosity. Looking at it, just the visible part of the trunk already needed 4 people with outstretched hands to cover its width. Mark scaled the trunk with his eyes while frowning. He could feel a very faint fluctuation from the tree. As he felt that, he could not help but suspect that this tree had a little bit of sentience. There was also the strange behavior of the mutant woodman outside. He already noticed it when he was scouting the perimeter of the compound using the drone. The mutant woodman was moving slowly around the city hall but did not seem to dare to come close or enter the building. Thinking about it deeper, his conjectures were plausible. And if this tree really had sentience, it was not aggressive. Or else, how could the survivors stay here safely? Mark decided to ponder about these things later. Right now, he needed to get to Charmaine as soon as possible. He looked up and saw the crack on the ceiling he used when he made the drone enter the building. They followed the path the drone took before and reached the corner of the hallway that would directly lead them to the reception area of this floor, the area where the survivors were staying. "Gale, just follow behind me, all right?" The little girl nodded at Mark's instruction, but he had a feeling that he should keep this little girl on a leash or something. With Abigail following behind him, Mark calmly walked towards the reception area. Actually, he could already see the people on the reception area and the people also saw him. However, no one went to approach him. Of course, who in the right mind would approach a fully armed person with his face fully covered? It looked like these people here were still in their right minds. When Mark and Abigail reached the reception area, everyone present was carefully watching him. The police and bodyguards were even standing in front of the congresswoman. Mark's gaze swept through the people and stopped on a person. It was the man wearing a business suit that pushed Charm earlier and destroyed the radio. There were 2 bodyguards standing in front of him. It looked like that not all of the bodyguards here belonged to the congresswoman, different from what Mark thought. Abigail saw the businessman and her eyes lit up. She was already in the posture to dash over and give the businessman a brutal kick. However, as she kicked her foot on the floor, her kick did not give her any force to move forward. She felt an arm latch onto her waist and lifted her up. "You're not going on kill stealing again, seriously." She looked up at her papa with displeasure. "Mew, Papa, I want to do it." She threw a tantrum. "No, if you don't listen to me, there's no cuddle later." Her face became sullen as she crossed her arms while hanging on her papa's left arm. Still, she finally conceded and went silent. Mark noticed Abigail as she moved into the posture to charge towards the businessman and lifted her up. This savage little girl was actually going to steal his kill again. The people around saw what the 2 was doing and looked at 2 without knowing how to react to their banter. These 2 were actually father and daughter. That was what was running in the minds of the people around them. Even Charm was surprised. She knew that it was her big brother that came, as she still remembered his stature and his voice, but she did not expect that he already had a daughter. Back then, before he separated from them, he was the type of man who would not fall into any relationship easily. Did a woman got interested and married her big brother? Looking at the beautiful doll-like girl, it was impossible that the partner was not a good-looking woman either. While most of the survivors saw it as a normal banter while disregarding the contents of what the father and daughter said, the businessman, his bodyguards and the congresswoman's group totally understood what the 2 was talking about. The 2 intended on ending the man's life. The businessman started sweating. Then he looked far away as he looked at his 2 bodyguards. The man with the assault rifle was one thing, but what could the little girl do? The businessman's confidence grew. They had more numbers. What was he afraid of? Mark then looked at the man. He was monitoring everyone's emotional fluctuations so he could at least guess what the man was thinking. Using his free hand, he pointed the assault rifle towards the man's group. The businessman's eyes grew wide while the 2 bodyguards also pointed their pistols at Mark while blocking the man from Mark's assault rifle. "Big brother, a Euro." Charmaine, who was just a few meters away from Mark, called him. Mark replied without looking at her and kept staring at the businessman's group. "Charm, just wait there a little bit. I'll just deal with this guy first." "Buddha Euro. Just wait there." Mark's voice was firmer this time, making her stop. The nurse beside her also stopped her from talking as she was in a bad condition right now. It was a standstill between the bodyguards and Mark. Both parties were silent. The one who broke the silence was the little girl who was being lifted by her papa. "Papa, too slow." It was not that Mark was being slow or he was trying to read the 2 bodyguards. He was waiting for something. Mark smirked behind his moss as he saw the businessman who was dripping with cold sweat. It was then that the congresswoman made a move. She stepped in front of her guards despite their protests and spoke. "Excuse me, but isn't it better if you all stand down? It would be a problem if the infected outside get alarmed if a shootout starts here right now. There are also other people here that might get implicated." It was what Mark was waiting for the congresswoman to stand up and mediate. From the video feed Mark saw from the drone, he was sure that this man he intended to kill was someone with high standing, or else this congresswoman might had already made a move on that man so they could get his approval to help them. "It's not a problem to us if the infected gets alarmed. We're leaving after I get my sister out of here. The problem is yours, not mine. Besides, you all saw what happened. It's not us who started it." When the people around heard him, they draw in a cold breath. This guy did not care about humanism at all. The congresswoman was right. He was also right. If a gunfight were to happen, not only they will get implicated but will also attract the monsters below. And none of it was his problem once they left. "What could we do for you to stop?" The congresswoman thought of the consequences. Whether the businessman or the man with the little girl won, everyone here would be in grave danger. She decided to relent and negotiate. "Then, give me compensation, for him pushing my sister and for destroying my radio. What can you give me?" The congresswoman was exasperated inside. She realized that this man was doing this on purpose. It was extortion. Still, she could not do anything about it. In the first place, it was the businessman's fault. What do you want? €1. Why are you asking me what I want? I doubt you have it. That's why I'm asking what you can give me. The congresswoman felt helpless. In her whole political career, she was never at a disadvantage like this. What could she give him? Food? Even she had not eaten a meal since yesterday night. Weapons? They even barely had anything left. All of his guards had guns, but not all of them still had ammunition remaining. Even if she gave all the ammunition they had left, were those enough to satisfy him? Surely not. Big brother, Charmaine called. What? Please, don't make it difficult for Madame Laney. She did her best to help us all here. She even gave me her last cracker last night. Hearing what Charmaine said, Mark's view about the congresswoman lightened a bit and decided to compromise a little. If you don't have anything, then just give me information. Congresswoman Laney's face lightened as she looked at Charmaine with gratitude. What information? First, about the huge tree that grew through the building. Second, the information about the premises of the police command center, especially the armory. I want the claim of any weapon and equipment in there. All right. The congresswoman nodded. But madam, the weapons and equipment there are property of the police. It's against the law to hand those over to anyone without proper authorization. One of the policemen behind Madame Laney voiced his concerns. The congresswoman looked at him with a helpless expression. Law and order already collapsed. Also, it's better to make use of those weapons and equipment rather than making it rot there. She then looked towards Mark. You said that you claim of any weapon and equipment, but I'm sure that you can't take all of those. We can take the remains, right? What she said was reasonable. Mark nodded. Then, can you please lower your gun already? She turned towards businessman and his bodyguards. You people, also. Put down your guns. Both parties lowered their weapons at the same time. As the conflict was somehow alleviated, everyone watching sighed in relief. Mark left a last glance at the businessman's group and went towards Charmaine with the displeased Abigail in tow. Day 3 €. 8:11 a.m. €. Bacoor City Hall 4th floor, Molino Boulevard, Bayanan, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark, who had already removed his mask, sat in front of Charmaine. She narrated what happened to her while she ate the food her big brother brought for her. According to her story, when the infected came, it was total chaos. The local government was actually waiting for the military evacuation team to come before the outbreak reached this area, but the evacuation team never came. At the last moment, the police and the other government armed divisions tried to evacuate the people by themselves but failed miserably. Not only they lost people and failed to evacuate, all the people who tried to evacuate fell into the hands of the infected. It's good that you didn't join them, Mark said as he put Abigail in front of him and cuddled her to stop her tantrum. He channeled that calming energy to her and tried to control it little by little. It was effective as the little girl started curl into his embrace and slowly drifted into sleep. He was also managing to train his ability like this. I actually wanted to join them, but the people pushed me behind. They all rushed to the vehicles that I didn't even have the chance to squeeze through. Charmaine said with a bitter smile. Still, her not being able to join those people saved her. She continued with her story. Without any choice left, the people who lost hope in evacuating went into the building and tried to barricade the higher floors. Then the massacre happened. Then what about that huge tree? Hearing what Mark asked about, Charmaine shook her head. The tree started to grow yesterday. It took it about a whole day, I think. No one was able to rest the whole time it was growing. The building was shaking too much that everyone was afraid that it would collapse. The weariness was visible in Charmaine's eyes while she narrated what happened yesterday. Eat up and regain your strength. Well, leave this place after you recover. Charmaine looked at Mark for a bit while thinking about something. Seeing his resolute expression, she finally nodded. Brother, can I share some of these? She grabbed several packs of biscuits and asked Mark. Mark did not even have to look to other directions. He could feel the envy and the eagerness of the people around as they saw the food he brought for Charmaine. Even the guards, the policeman and the congresswoman was not an exception. However, no one dared to ask for food from her while Mark was there. By what he behaved earlier, everyone think of him as a ruthless and lawless person who would kill for the slightest grievance. Mark sighed while looking at Charmaine. This girl had not changed at all. Like several years ago, she was not selfless but not selfish either. She would share things if she have some extra. All right, just be sure to leave enough for you to eat, there aren't much of those. Hearing what he said, Charmaine was delighted. She immediately called the nurse and gave several packets for the people to share. It was not enough at all, but at least, they had something to put into their stomachs. Mark caressed the head of the sleeping savage girl, which took Charmaine's attention. "Big brother, you're already married?" To her question, Mark did not know how to react. "I didn't. You think someone would fall for someone as worthless as me? You're still harsh to yourself, aren't you? If you haven't married yet, then this girl is? A kid and I picked up. Big bro, I'm asking seriously here. I really picked her up. I'm not joking." Charmaine had a lot of questions about the little girl but was forced to stop since Mark shoved a piece of packed bread into her mouth. "You're asking too much. Just concentrate on eating." She looked at her big brother with eyes filled with grievance. He just needed to say it if he wanted her to stop talking. He did not need to shove that piece of bread to her mouth. Since Abigail was asleep, Mark tried to peel her off and make the little girl lay down beside Charmaine, but as he tried to do so, she immediately woke up. "Gail, just sleep for a bit, would you?" The little girl rubbed her eyes and answered. "No, if Papa is leaving, I'll go too." Mark looked at the little girl. She was not familiar with anyone here, so she did not want to be left alone. He could not reprimand her either, as she meant no harm, at least, to him and his people. "All right, but don't do anything without my permission." Abigail nodded. "Charm, I'll just talk to them for a little. Finish your food, all right." "Big brother, don't fight with them. Don't worry, I won't, unless they start first." Mark together with Abigail left Charmaine with the nurse. Charmaine looked at his back as he left. She was really worried that Mark would fight with the congresswoman and her guards. It looked like her brother changed a lot in the past years. He was always silent and timid before, but now, he was behaving unruly and brave. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Mark approached the congresswoman's group and was led into an office. Of course, as a congresswoman, her office was not in this place. The office Mark was led to was actually the office of the mayor. It gave Mark a question in his mind. What happened to the mayor? Still, Mark had no notion to voice this question. It was not hard to guess what could have happened to the mayor if he was not here. When Mark entered, the congresswoman led him to seat in front of the mayor's table and she sat behind it. The bodyguards stood by the door while only one of the policemen stood beside her. Mark sat on the chair and Abigail sat on his lap. "I want to apologize about what happened earlier. We did not expect that he would push your sister away and snatch the radio. He even ended up breaking it." Madame Laney put up an apologetic expression. Mark felt that she was really sorry, but as if he'd just accept that apology. "I don't care about your apology. The damage had already been done and I already reduced the compensation as much as possible. Actually, I want to at least have a replacement for the radio, but I don't want those outdated models the government issued the police and the military." "You." The policeman was about to say something, but the congresswoman stopped him by raising her hand. "I'm really grateful that you toned down the compensation you wanted. We really have nothing to give you if you didn't." Mark looked at her directly. "Actually, you guys are not the ones to pay, but that guy. Why are you even taking responsibility for him? You don't understand. We politicians have to rely on connections to do a lot of things, not only for ourselves but also for the people. That man, he had relatives in the Senate, you see, and they are in the same party as us." Mark nodded. He understood the context as it was not a new topic at all. "Back to what I'm here for. I want to ask what you know about the huge tree above us." The congresswoman had a bad premonition as Mark suddenly changed the topic but could not get hold of it. Since it was like that, she just proceeded to answer his question. But first €1. Could you please introduce yourself first? I really have a bad time finding out how I should address you. Mark felt exasperated. Introducing himself was one of the things Mark hated to do. Mark, just Mark is fine. Mark, is it? Mark nodded. Now, answer my question. Madame Laney rested her hands on the table and replied. Actually, we have no idea where the tree came from or why it grew from beneath this building. However, we knew that the infected outside seemed to be affected by the tree. Are you talking about the infected with wooden skin and that large one that frequent the back of the building? Yes. They started to appear while the tree was growing. Since we are occupied trying to resist the tremors while the tree grew, none of us actually saw how the infected change. Mark grew silent as one of his theories was proven. The huge tree really had a connection with the woodman. If you knew nothing about the tree, I'm at a disadvantage with the deal, don't I? Now that Mark brought it up, the congresswoman also felt troubled. Never mind. Just tell me the information I needed about the police command center. There's no problem about that. Madame Laney pointed her open palm to her left. This is Chief Mallory. As the chief of our local police branch, he knew the most about it. As he was introduced, Chief Mallory gave Mark the information he wanted to know. He even showed Mark a rough sketch of how the floor plan of the command center looked like. From the front desk to the armory, everything was showed to Mark. All right, this is enough. Mark took the sketch of the floor plan and rolled it. Then, Madame Laney asked a question. I want to ask, do you not have a single thought of helping the people here? Don't bother about asking that. I don't. Why? Why should I? All of you guys had nothing to do with me at all. Furthermore, you guys will just end up as nuisance if I did help you. The chief, the policemen and the bodyguards who heard him felt incensed. What in the world are you saying? On the other hand, Madame Laney remained composed. Mark then continued. First, I have to find several more people. Going in a large group with a very low combat ability will end up with everyone dying. A large group is eye-catching and hard to hide. Second, I don't have anywhere to put you all into. I can't escort you to Bay City either. Third, are you guys able to provide your own necessities? The main battle strength would surely become my group. I don't want to take on that responsibility. You might have your guards, but the rest are total baggage. The men inside clenched their fists but did not have the reason to refute him. All what he said was true after all. Mark then stood up and put down Abigail on the floor. You're leaving already. That's right. I already have what I wanted. There's no reason to stay. Is that so? The congresswoman had a bitter look on her face. There was really no way for cooperation. Won't you at least take my men with you to retrieve the weapons in the PCC? They can help you. What kind of help? If they are willing to be a baggage carrier, then I can bring them with me. The men were really enraged now. They were trained combatants and police. What did he mean what he said? Knowing the minds of the people around, Mark snickered. You guys shouldn't try to inflate your egos. I know that you guys haven't eaten anything since last night. Do you have the energy to spare and say that you guys could help? Don't make me laugh. Spend your energy to find your own food than becoming baggage for me. With that, Mark stepped out of the room with Abigail tugging behind him. The people inside was left incensed and speechless. The congresswoman plopped herself onto the table. Madam, are you fine? Chief Mallory asked. I'm fine. I just feel stressed and hungry. It is hard to talk to that man. That's right. He is full of air and even belittled us. It's no wonder that you will have a hard time talking to him, madam. One of the bodyguards said. All of you don't seem to understand. What you said is true, but that is not the reason. I just feel that man knew what I and you people are thinking. He's not leaving holes for us to exploit at all. That can't be right. Madam, are you sure about that? Another bodyguard asked. But the one that replied was the chief. I also noticed it. That guy sure can read us. With that, the men fell silent.